Everyone knows this story, coders, because that's how it's written. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. Genesis 2:17. Now the serpent was more cunning than any other animal. Genesis 3:1. A forbidden tree. A serpent many call the devil. A fruit that supposedly changed the destiny of humankind. That's what everyone believes. That's what everyone was taught. But what if it wasn't like that? What if this tree wasn't a tree at all? What if the serpent was never a demon? What if what happened in Eden had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with knowledge, with biology, or with something no one ever dared to explain? And here comes the detail no one explains, coders. The detail that changes everything. God didn't forbid violence. He didn't forbid lies. He didn't forbid selfishness. He forbade knowledge.
For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Genesis 2:17. But when they eat, they don't die. Something much stranger happens. Then the eyes of both of them were opened. Genesis 3:7. Their eyes open, their mind awakens, consciousness appears. Why would a God forbid that? Why fear that human beings might open their eyes? And even more unsettling, the man has become like one of us. Genesis 3:22. One of us, who is us? Whom does the human become equal to when they awaken? They told you it was a sin. They told you it was rebellion. But what if what happened there was not moral, but biological? And here comes the most puzzling part of the story. The coders. The text never describes an ordinary tree.
It never speaks of roots, trunk, or wood. The only thing it says is, the tree was good for food and desirable to make one wise. Genesis 3:6. Since when does a tree give wisdom? Since when does a fruit alter consciousness? In ancient cultures, a tree was a symbol, a metaphor, a code. In Sumer, it represented the structure of life in Babylon, the connection between heaven and earth. In the Kabbalah, the internal map of the human being. And in the Bible, it's the only tree that doesn't give food, but knowledge. What kind of fruit awakens the mind? What kind of tree changes human perception? And why did that tree have to remain forbidden? They told you it was an apple. They told you it was moral. But none of that fits, because this tree wasn't botanical. It was symbolic, profound, and perhaps biological.
And now we come to the most misunderstood character in the story, the serpent, coders. Because the text says, now the serpent was more cunning than any other animal. Genesis 3:1. But in no verse does it say it was Satan that came thousands of years later. Before Christianity, the serpent was not a symbol of evil. It was life. It was wisdom. It was renewal. It was hidden knowledge. In Egypt, it represented divine power. In Greece, medicine. In Sumer, awakening. And here, in Eden, the serpent does not force, does not threaten, does not manipulate. It simply says, if you eat, your eyes will be opened. In Genesis 3:5. And that is exactly what happens. It's not magic.
It's not deception. It's awakening. The serpent appears at the very moment when the human being is about to activate something within themselves, something the tree represented, something that was not meant to be reached yet. But if the serpent was not an enemy, what was it, and what was it trying to activate? And here comes the part no one mentions, coders. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit, their bodies don't change. Their skin doesn't change. Their health doesn't change. They don't die. They don't get sick. They don't transform physically. But the Bible describes something much stranger. Then the eyes of both of them were opened. Genesis 3:7. And their eyes open, Not their physical eyes, the eyes of consciousness. Suddenly, they feel shame. They recognize themselves.
They perceive duality. The I is born. Judgment is born. The human mind, as we know it, is born. What kind of fruit does that? No apple explains it. No literal tree produces a cognitive leap. This doesn't sound like a moral punishment. It sounds like an internal switch, a neurological awakening, something that activates mental processes that did not exist before. Was the tree a metaphor for a biological change, a genetic warning, a limit imposed so that humans wouldn't awaken too quickly? Because after the fruit, humanity does not become corrupt. It becomes conscious. And that is what changed history.
The ancient pattern of forbidden knowledge. And here comes the most surprising part of all, coders. This is not the first time forbidden knowledge appears, long before the biblical Eden, long before Adam and Eve. The Sumerians wrote about a place called Dilmun, a perfect garden, no disease, no death. A space where, according to those tablets, human beings were formed. And if you want to understand that origin in depth, we already have a full video about Dilmun on the channel. We won't repeat it now. We'll only take what we need to understand this point. Because in that ancient garden, there was also something that could not be touched. Something reserved. Something that did not belong to human beings. The Sumerian texts speak of forbidden knowledge, imposed laws, and knowledge that only the superior beings could handle the same pattern, the same tension, the same warning. What we see in the biblical Eden had already been told thousands of years earlier.
Enki and Enlil, the conflict that repeated in Eden. And if you remember the previous videos, coders, on those same Sumerian tablets, there appears a conflict that defines all of human history. Two entities, two opposing visions, two forces that could never come to an agreement. Enki, the one who shares knowledge, who teaches, who awakens, who opens human eyes. Enlil, the one who imposes limits, who forbids, who keeps human beings under control, who fears that man will reach too far. This clash, which we have already analyzed in depth on the channel, is not an isolated myth. It is a pattern. And here is the unsettling part, coders. That same conflict appears in Eden, one forbidding knowledge, another revealing it, one trying to keep humans limited, another unleashing their awakening. It is the same story, with different names, told in another language.
The tree as a genetic warning. And when you bring together biblical Eden with Sumerian Dilmun, with the Serpent of Awakening, and with the conflict between Enki and Enlil, the story starts to look different, coders. It no longer looks like a moral myth, nor a children's tale, nor a lesson about disobedience. It looks like a boundary, a lock, a warning, a barrier placed upon humanity, for reasons that were never explained to us. Because in both accounts, the Sumerian and the biblical, what is forbidden is not force, not violence, not evil. It is knowledge, reserved knowledge, selective knowledge, knowledge that only they could handle. And the most revealing part is this. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit, they do not activate magical powers. They do not change their bodies. They do not alter their physical form. They activate consciousness. They activate the mind. They activate something internal, something that was asleep, that doesn't sound like an apple. That sounds like a switch, a code, a biological process that was not meant to be triggered early. In Dilmun, Enki wanted to share that knowledge and Enlil wanted to forbid it. In Eden, the serpent activates that knowledge, and the divinity suppresses it. It is the same pattern, repeated twice in cultures separated by millennia. Why? Maybe the tree of knowledge was not a moral test, but a genetic warning. Maybe the fruit was not food, but a metaphor for an internal process, a mental leap, an unauthorized acceleration. Maybe the prohibition was not punishment, but an attempt to delay the awakening of humanity. Because after that fruit, sin did not appear, consciousness did.
Why forbid awakening? And now that we understand the pattern, there is only one question left, coders. Why would anyone want to prevent humans from awakening? The Bible gives a disturbing clue. The man has become like one of us. Genesis 3:22. One of us, not inferior, not limited, not subdued, equal, capable, conscious. That verse doesn't sound like moral fear. It sounds like hierarchical fear. Fear that humans might cross a reserved boundary. And when you compare it with the Sumerian accounts, the logic repeats. The reason of control. Enlil. Someone feared that humans would awaken too much. Someone wanted to keep their evolution under control to prevent them from reaching levels of consciousness they could not manage. Or that they simply were not meant to have the reason of protection. Enki others believed that knowledge meant growth, development, evolution, a necessary spark for humanity to find its purpose. Eden and Dilmun tell exactly the same story. A powerful knowledge that could elevate or destroy. That's why the boundary. That's why the warning. That's why the punishment. It wasn't the fruit. It wasn't the act. It was what that knowledge could set in motion. Because in both accounts, coders, knowledge does not make humans evil. It makes them conscious, autonomous, free. And freedom, in almost every mythology, has always been the most dangerous thing.
The full story, hidden in plain sight. So then, when you bring all the elements together, coders, the story reveals itself completely. The garden, the tree, the serpent, the awakening, the punishment. And when you look at them alongside the Sumerian accounts, the Anunnaki become the ancient us. Enki becomes the serpent of knowledge, the one who activates, who teaches, who opens the eyes. Enlil becomes the prohibiting voice, the one who imposes limits, who controls, who fears that humans will awaken too quickly. Dilmun becomes the first Eden, the prototype of the perfect garden, where knowledge was reserved and where humanity was shaped under strict laws. And the tree of knowledge, instead of being a literal tree, appears as what it always was, a symbol of something deeper, a code, an activation, an evolutionary step that could not be taken without consequences. The Bible says, "The man has become like one of us." Genesis 3:22. And the Sumerian tablets say there was a group of superior beings caring for, shaping, and controlling humanity in a very similar garden. They are not opposing stories. They are mirrors. Two versions of the same fear. The fear that humans might awaken, that they might open their eyes, that they might cross a boundary reserved for higher beings. That's why the tree. That's why the serpent. That's why the punishment. It wasn't about a fruit. It wasn't about disobedience. It was about the power of knowledge and the irreversible impact of having consciousness. A knowledge that could elevate them or destroy them. A knowledge that divided the gods. Some wanted to give it, others wanted to hide it. And that conflict, from Dilmun to Eden, fell upon a single point, the exact moment when the human being switched on consciousness for the first time. Maybe that was the real, original sin, not eating a fruit, but awakening. And maybe that genetic warning is still alive today, coders, because every time you awaken, you break a boundary that someone wanted to keep closed.